And we're live. Hello. Thanks very much for joining me. Welcome to the Science Fiction Station on our Science Fiction Friday, if you're out there. It's quite a cold one here tonight. We're just sort of settling down for a wee cuppa and a bit of a chat about science fiction, hopefully. And for anybody who's joining us and not too sure, this isn't the book club, by the way, folks. So just every week we do pop on and have a wee bit of a chat about what's on our mind with science fiction and stuff like that. But we've started up the June Book Club, just for a recap, on Thursdays and Sundays at 9 o'clock GMT. Excuse me. And I think that's going quite well. But our episode ended up being about 3.5 hours long each, I think. And we do keep getting cut off by YouTube, unfortunately. But whenever this happens, we're putting them up in a playlist for the book club, and we're basically, if they go up in two parts, if we get an episode cut in half, then we're just going to put them up as that chapter, part 1 and part 2, hopefully. And hopefully just pretty much whenever we lose the broadcast like that, we pick up where we left off, pretty much. So hopefully, if we're looking back over the book club episodes, there'll be a few of them that'll be split in two. So we'll put part 1 and part 2 on them. Excuse me. And we've sorted out the naming a wee bit within the playlist, so that you can see this is chapter 2, this is chapter 1, etc. Make it a bit more easier to navigate, I suppose. So yeah, so it's going quite well, I think. I'm not too sure about how best to proceed, but as I said, we've annotated the heck out of the June novel, and I'm quite enjoying it, really taking it apart with a fine tooth comb. And in particular, I was actually just thinking about how we read June. I'm not ready to go into it too much tonight because we'll keep it for the book club. But I was trying to figure out how was I reading this book this time around. And I've talked about how we can read June from a psychological point of view, from a feminist point of view, from a science fiction point of view, from the view of it as being a critique of the hero. We can take it as an ecological primer. There's lots of different ways of reading the book, and I've kind of had a good look at a lot of them. But I've been hoping to try and approach it in some way that's different this time, really to make it a little bit fresher for me. And I suppose from my own point of view, that I was kind of trying to think, what am I doing with this? Excuse me, this time, how am I approaching it? And I'm trying to do a kind of combination, I suppose, of all of those. But in particular, I think I was really focusing on Frank's writing. The way I'm looking at it, I'm really trying to pay attention to his craft, if you see what I mean. And as much as he's had some deliberate intentions about how he's gone about writing June, I kind of I've always wanted to investigate them, because he's not always honest. There's Babs saying, "Evening Doc." Hello, Babs. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're keeping well. Yeah, hopefully, I'm not too sure if you lost us last night with the YouTube going down the way it did. Excuse me. But I was just sort of saying that if this happens, we'll just try and get the broadcast up and running again, and we'll put them up as part 1 and part 2. So I think the June book club's going well, and but in particular, I suppose, thinking about one wee comment that somebody made the other day. I was just reading a wee bit. I'll have to bring this up at the next June book club, actually. But I was just reading a bit about the Oedipus myth by Robert Graves, and it was a comment that that I made. That we have a bit of an international audience, and we were talking about people seeing their own culture's myths in June. And someone had suggested about the Mabinogion, I think it was the the Welsh myth, and Graves was making a wee bit of an association in this story, in his interpretation of it, and he was comparing Oedipus to the Welsh Dylan. And the reason why he was doing it, I thought was kind of interesting, is that if you take Oedipus's name as meaning swollen feet, I think there's a slight variation of the name, which would suggest that the name doesn't mean that at all, but means swollen sea, if you like. And it's to do with two different versions of how Oedipus as a child is left out to die, if you like. One is that his feet are nailed together and put on a tree on Mount, I think it's Kithaeron, and that's what we call death by exposure in the ancient world. The other one is that he's put in a box and pushed out to sea, etc. So his name is suggestive of what happened to him at childhood, and so it's either Oedipus, meaning swollen feet in Greek, or I think he suggests it's Oedopius or something like that. I must look it up for you, which means swelling of the sea. And Graves was pointing out that this is what the Welsh hero Dylan's name means, and he was trying to point out a little bit of a continuity in some of these stories. If you like, I suppose it's the idea of comparative myth. As opposed to a monomyth. There's David Segovia saying, hello, evening to everyone. Hello, David. Thanks very much for joining us. We're just on for our wee Saturday night chat, or Friday night chat, for goodness sake. Don't even know what day it is, as usual. And hopefully we'll not have any kicks from YouTube tonight. And just sort of saying about the book club, whenever we do get wee kicks, we'll knit the episodes together and so on. So I just thought, I don't know, I was going to have a wee chat tonight. I put up a wee title card there. And I think I'm trying to remember the artist's name for the life of me. Let me see if I can just find him here tonight. And I just thought that I was trying to think of what should we have a wee chat about tonight outside of June. Right, yellow. Bear with me a wee second if I can find this artist's name. There we go. What's that? Mark Salwowski. That's it. The little title card that we put up on the episode tonight is from the culture book, State of the Art. And I just thought it was just in regards to the culture, not so much as in regards to the culture, but what is the state of the art of science fiction? I suppose what is the state of the art in the world at the minute? But we're heading to doing a lot of work on the culture. Sadly, and I was saying to my wife, I love that picture by the artist. Sadly, it's not the copy that I have. Excuse me. Because I really like that picture. And for anybody who hasn't read this, if you want a gentle introduction to the culture and the science fiction of Ian M. Banks, The State of the Art is a wee collection, nice and thin, of short stories. And they're mostly culture stories, but they're not all. And they give you a wee bit of an idea. I suppose if you're looking for a quick introduction to the culture, there's 8 stories in this little collection. Let me see. We've got this copyright first published 1991. So it's not, I think it's probably third or maybe fourth or fifth, and third or fourth, maybe in the order of publication of the culture novels. But we're going to be heading down towards doing a whole pile of stuff on hopefully the culture. And I'm looking at just trying to put together a general video on the culture at some point. And then really start picking apart the books, and we'll probably begin with Consider Fleabas, the first culture book. But in terms of what I was thinking about tonight, folks, I'm just about to get my first video up on Alfred Bester, and it'll be up hopefully in about a week or two. Excuse me, hopefully about a week. And The Star Is My Destination. This is my copy. It's one of these really nice little editions that came out a few years back. I had a copy of I Am Legend in this. I suppose actually we're going back quite a while. It's the Orion books version, illustration by Mark Adams. So I've just got through Tiger. This is the other name for this book is Tiger, and I've just been thinking about it an awful lot. And sadly, I don't think these books by Alfred Bester are in the public domain yet. This one's 1956. And the other book that kind of really goes with it, I think, is The Demolished Man, and I've got a copy on the way at the minute. And I have to say, I was going through this book kind of slowly, trying to absorb it, and then kind of hit the second part of it, and it very much accelerated for me, I think. And I absolutely love this book. And it's just, I wanted to chat. I'm going to do a wee video all about it. But just in terms of if you're not familiar with Alfred Bester or these two particular books, If you haven't read them, I would highly recommend them. Um, and arguably, and what I ended up thinking about, folks, and I suppose in terms of the state of the art and the conversation we were starting, um, is how influential this book is, um, and how broad its influence is. And it got me to thinking that actually it's possibly an influence on June. Pardon me, and particularly, I suppose, Gully Foyle being the character that he is. The main character of this book is Gully Foyle, who's described as a cipher. He's a nothing. He's almost inert. um, Having just got through it, and also understanding that it's kind of I suppose this book is in partly another one of these responses to the world of John W. Campbell Jr. and the kind of heroes that he's putting out. And I'll get to talking about their publication history in the video, I suppose. This one's got a rather I suppose it's an interesting enough article. I'll use the word interesting. You know, I use it quite a lot. It has an interesting introduction by Neil Gaiman there, and is of Time and Gully Foyle. And there's a few wee things actually in that introduction I don't particularly agree with. But just in terms of what I was seeing in this book, I'll be honest with you, the number of books that I think are influenced by this, and the number of works, etc. But the one that was kicking and screaming in my head, kind of because I've just finished watching the end of it, and I missed a few of the episodes, so I've backtracked and I'm now watching it again. Is the Expanse owes an awful lot to this book, I'd argue, or the world of the Expanse certainly, and there's shadings of Paul Atreides here. Arguably, you would have to be a very, very angry Paul Atreides, not cautious, not composed in any way, you know. And yeah, there's a few references to just to read you this, folks. I don't know what you think about this. If any Dune fans are out here, this is a bit near the end of the book, and it's not going to give away any of the plot or anything to Tiger. But if you understand that Canopus is Arrakis, this is from Tiger, and it says, again and again he turned now into now. Canopus, yellow as the sun, gigantic, thunderous in the silent wastes of space, at last invaded by a creature that once was Guild. The creature hung gulping on the beach of the universe, nearer death than life, nearer the future than the past, 10 leagues beyond the wide world's end. It wandered at the masses of dust, meteors, and motes that girdled Canopus in a broad, flat ring, like the rings of Saturn and of the breadth of Saturn's orbit. And the person's transported somewhere else there. Excuse me. I don't know what you think about that, but it's just a particular nod. This is where the character's moving through different planets, different stars, and taking in what's around him. I suppose it's kind of a Kwisatz Haderach type moment, being many places at once, and arguably, I suppose this would be a messianic science fiction. And would fit very well in with things like Dune, Stranger in a Strange Land, this kind of thing. But our Messiah in this is a pretty frightening individual, I have to say. Canopus is the system where Arrakis is located, right? That's correct, David. Yeah. We were saying that we did a wee bit about it in, I think, in the book club. I think I have it here somewhere. Let me see. Or am I getting the right? Yeah. So Arrakis is, according to the terminology, third planet of the Canopus system. And so we had a wee bit of that's in June. We had a wee chat that in reality, Arrakis is really Mu Draconis Alpha, which is in the constellation Draco. But it is indeed. I suppose that if you think about whenever we were talking about the star, in the book club, there is a particular myth associated with excuse me, and a mythological story associated with the star that's called Arrakis, and so Herbert kind of takes the myth and the name and uses it as Canopus. But that's right, yeah. So and I was just this book is published in 1956, and there's Joseph Smith saying hello. Hi, Joseph. So it was just a wee thing, and it's not a particular. I just thought that was a very interesting little passage, and it's just on its own right at the end of the book there. It's to do with jaunting, and I suppose it's approaching the sort of apex of the story, and it's and it's one of those on the shape of things to come kind of thing, where we end up with a messianic character out of this nothing. So in terms of just as I said, we're going to have a good old chat about this and put together hopefully an interesting piece of work on it. Excuse me. But what we have is a character that is a response to the Campbellian era, a story that's a response to the Campbellian era, and arguably something that's very, very important within science fiction. I think very influential. And I would argue that if you're reading Bester, from my own point of view, he sits very comfortably with Philip K. Dick, but not in the same way. But I don't know. There's a sort of time to this kind of writing. And so if you were comfortable reading Philip K. Dick, it's not as weird, I would say, as Philip K. Dick. But it can certainly take you places. But if you were comfortable reading Philip K. Dick, you'd be very happy to read an Alfred Bester book. Excuse me. But it really is just refreshing my memory of it all these years ago. I'll give you some of the quotes about it, by the way. If it is considered, Dune is often considered the greatest science fiction book ever written. And it's a matter of personal choice, isn't it? There's many that think that this is the book, this one. And often, I know people do top tens, and I'm not a fan of these things, as I've said. But I suppose from my own point of view, doing this science fiction station, I've talked about there's an absolute wealth of science fiction out there. Who should we pick out? And as much as there's a lot of quantity, the real idea here is to go for the quality, the absolute crackers, the real books that stand out, way above the rest. This is one of them. And I've just finished it, and I'm absolutely in love with it. It's so good. A couple of just to give you a few bits. I think I've maybe read this off the back before. The quotes on the back are considered by many to be the greatest single science fiction novel. That's Samuel R. Delany. Excuse me. We've got Joe Haldeman here. His quote is, science fiction has produced only a few works of actual genius, and this is one of them. And of course, we've got one of the great science fiction novels by Thomas M. Dish. It's a book highly regarded within a certain sphere of science fiction writers within a time, if you like. And it begins with this as a golden age. It is another, as I said, it fits very well hand in hand with Dune, I think, as does Stranger in a Strange Land. And the idea that this character is a response to whether we call them Campbellian heroes or Van Vottian heroes, etc., this kind of thing. And I'd argue in this case much more a response to probably John W. Campbell himself. We're going to do a wee bit of looking into the matter. Excuse me. The Star's My Destination was actually written by Bester in England, I believe. And a lot of the character names and names within names of industries and businesses and so on, the big corporations, come from town names around the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, and so on. But it really is just, and I've just been thinking about it. Wow, there's so much in here. And in terms of what kind of novel it is, its framework arguably is the Count of Monte Cristo, and certain episodes that I suppose things that occur to the Gullyfoyle character echo what happens to goodness, what is it? Edmund Dantes, isn't it? Um, in the Count of Monte Cristo. God, have I got that character right? There's the thing. My memory. Have I got the Count of Monte Cristo here? I do, somewhere. Um, Goodness, I haven't read any Demand Donkey's Years. Let me just check before I go. Is it Edmund Dantes? I can't remember. Excuse me. Yeah, it is. Thank goodness for that. Oh dear, that would be really bad. My memory sometimes I have to check. So yeah, he's in a sense he's modeled on Edmund Dantes a wee bit, but within the framework, I suppose, of the story, that that's where it ends, and essentially what we have is a absolute pure revenge story, um, with a lot of mystery, a lot of intrigue, and oh yeah, I mean, I was thinking that there's elements of other books here, and I was just trying to think what has this influenced. Um, One of the things that I was certainly there's a character within the book called the Burning Man, and I was seeing heavily shades of the Shrike, um, from Dan Simmons' Hyperion cantos. So I don't know if yeah, and I just finishing up the book the other night. Just my head was just pinging. Oh, that's just like that. And as I said, the number of things that are in the Expanse, I would argue that are from this book, is ridiculous. um, yeah, and just to show you what a really interesting kind of book it is, um, and it's a sort of motifs of Bester's. I understand that if you get different editions of this book in different countries, that they can look different, but he plays with the text like this and does all sorts of things with it. And I think it's most interesting in the Demolished Man, um, where there we go. I think in the copy, well, as I said, I've lost my copy of the Demolished Man, so I have a new copy on the way. This kind of thing. Here we go. And it's really really interesting. I'm watching The Expanse. Joseph's just asked me, "Are you watching The Expanse?" I've just finished it, as in I watched the last series 6, and I'd watched series 5 before it, but I'd missed the episodes, kind of around the series 3, series 4 point. So I've gone back, and I kind of, just because it's all there, all there now, Joseph. I thought I'd actually tear through it again, and I've just started the 3rd season again, but I'm just kind of on the background piling through it, because there was a few things in the end of season 6, a few characters and stuff that I wasn't too sure who they were, or how they got there. So that was kind of my reason for doing it. But I'd argue that the political setup of The Expanse is the same as the setup that's presented to you in the prologue of this book. And the inner planets and the outers and so on. And the big one of the big mysteries, and I'm not going to give anything away, in this book is to do with something that's known as pyre, and it's capital PYR and then a capital E, and it's basically what you would call, it's the protomolecule basically. Um, in that sense, it's a similar thing, and it's not the same, but it is similar, and it's part of the mystery of the book, but not quite. And I suppose I don't really want to go on too much about it, but it's there's a great example there. For example, look at that. Isn't that lovely? I suppose in this day and age of all the computer fonts and wingdings and all these things, it's an absolutely lovely book to read. But yeah, there's an awful lot, I'd say, of The Expanse taken from this, and that's the thing. I suppose the star's my destination. Tiger. Excuse me. It starts reading as one thing, and suddenly we have we have this human being who's we start to find out he's heavily augmented. So this book leaps straight into the cyberpunk world in every shape and form, it's a powerhouse of cyberpunk. And once you realize that, and you're going, oh goodness, and there, yeah, I've started to see elements of particular character as well. I'd say elements of Paul Atreides in this character. Um, the idea of what a Kwisatz Haderach is, I suppose, something similar to what's going on with this character in this book. Um, and it's kind of tricky to explain because it is a mystery in a way, and I don't want to give too much away. But if anybody hasn't read this, um, you know, go get a copy, or if you can get it on audiobook, check it out. In fact, I think it would make a fantastic audio drama, to be honest with you. And we talked, I think we mentioned a wee bit, guys, about unfilmable books, in the sense of turning them into a film. I'd argue that this would make one hell of a film. You'd be like that. And the book, I suppose, Stars My Destination split into two, and I suppose what you can see would affect the story in some ways. But one of the reasons why it's considered unfilmable is, I suppose, it's in a mirror to the Count of Monte Cristo. The main character ends up in a prison, Gouffre Martel, I think it's called, and the point of this prison is it's designed to stop people from, I suppose, what's called jaunting, which is the main thing in the book. So it's a prison that's deep underground and there's no light. It's complete darkness, if you see what I mean. And there's parts of this book where the action would be contained in absolute darkness. And I think it's little things like that. But I don't know. I think if you approached it the right way, the right director or somebody could make a very good movie out of it. The Demolished Man, I suppose, which precedes it by a few years, is another very interesting book. It takes the language in the book within it. You get conversations between telepathic cops, I suppose, and their conversations on the book are in the form of a triple helix, um, which is quite interesting. But so it's really just in terms of thinking about science fiction that I see on the screen at the minute. I just thought that this has to be so influential, and I can see so much of other things, from this book. And then it's simply a question of understanding. Okay, when was this written? Right, 1956. Okay, then you realize what it precedes. I'd argue the Demolished Man, that would go quite well with something like Minority Report by Philip K. Dick. And this would be more a kind of I don't know. Philip K. Dick's a much gentler writer than this, but it's such an angry, vicious book, and it's hard to put, I suppose, a finger on Gully for it in some ways, as a character. But he's up there with Valentine Smith and with Paul Atreides for sure, I think. And as I said, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of Alfred Bester too much. Um, he doesn't seem to be particularly well known, I think, certainly to young readers, and I even say to a certain generation of older science fiction writers. Years and years ago, I think this must have been when I was. There we go. This was published in 1997. First edition is Alfred. I got this years ago, 97. Virtual Unrealities, which is a collection of Alfred Bester's short fiction. And I've only read this once, but again, he does all sorts of things with text, and I really enjoyed this book. I do remember enjoying it. It's at the point now where I can't remember these stories at all. It's got a good reintroduction by Robert Silverberg. But again, that's his short fiction, and that's a really good collection. As I said, I couldn't comment now on individual stories, but I do remember reading this book and tearing through it actually, and being very satisfied with it. Whenever I was getting into Alfred Bester, I read a whole bunch of his stuff at once. Now, sometimes you get this kind of thing with science fiction writers, and which is a bit sad. But I've got Extra by Alfred Bester here, and I've also got The Computer Connection by Alfred Bester here, and they're the same book. So as much as you can get Tiger, you can also get The Star's My Destination. They're the same book we're talking about, but it's something that I'd love to see on the screen, folks. And I said we have the Demolished Man on the way to the house. So our next episode is going to be on this. Our next video episode is going to be on The Star's My Destination, and I think we'll do our best to try and point out some of the influences of the book. But certainly it's worth having a look at in terms of certainly a lot of what we've been talking about over the last year. That in relation to Dune, particularly to types of hero, and especially the science fiction hero and the whole John W. Campbell thing. And as we said, if you're not too familiar with him, he's a driving force behind the magazine era in America. But his personality and beliefs end up being the force that drives away just about pretty much every single major writer that he ever signed, and a lot of these guys he had friendships with as well. So as a kind of he ends up being a kind of bit of a rack and ruin for American magazine science fiction, and you just get a big exodus, I think. And I think, yeah, Alfred Bester is certainly one of these authors that clears out quite early, I think, from that kind of influence, and heads off to. I think he's publishing in different magazines as well. I think it might be Galaxy magazine is his first published. I'm not too sure. Excuse me. Actually, Gollum 100, The Deceivers, Tender Loving Rage. So there's a few other novels by him, and Who Is He in 1953. I think he's quite famous for being something to do with the Green Lantern. And I'm not into that kind of thing. Let me just see. This edition, 2006. 56. Maybe it's the Demolished Man I'm thinking on. But I suppose it's a common thing these days. In those days to get magazine publication, then try to get your short story, etc., either into an omnibus or sold as a novel. So yeah, Alfred Bester coming up, and then we're going to be doing the Demolished Man, which is this great murder mystery. And I said, arguably, it's what you would call a perfect murder novel. Excuse me, folks. And then that'll be in terms of the videos that we're meant to be producing, we had done a wee A to Z sort of thing, and we've got to be a bit sidetracked doing a wee bit of work on the Pelopeds and stuff like that, and some audiobooks. But initially, we'd started our A to Z with A Boy and His Dog. So we did a wee video on both, I suppose, Bloods Are Over, the recent publication of the complete stories of Vic and Blood by Harlan Ellison. And that was our kind of launch into the A for our A to Z. And so our B, really, in terms of what we can do over the next year, that's kind of what we'd figured we'd do. Our B is going to be Alfred Bester, and we're going to do our next two videos, hopefully. Will be on Tiger, and then we're going to look at the Demolished Man as well. Excuse me. And then once we're done, I suppose B is for Banks, but then we're going to hit the culture, folks. And as much as I think that's going to be interesting, because we're taking a prolonged look at Dune through a book club at the minute. And not that I'll be doing the same thing with the culture, but in terms of tearing into the whole culture series, I'd like to hit all 10 books and kind of produce material on them. Take a real good look at the culture, which I've never really done in an academic way. I suppose I've just really enjoyed them, and books that I've read over and over again. And I don't know again if any of you are familiar with the culture either. But there's certainly plenty. I think all of them are available on audiobook now. Excuse me. And I've actually got one of them here somewhere. I can remember what I did with it. I think I promised to show you at some point, and then I've probably put it somewhere where I won't find it. But I have Matter on audiobook, which is like a six part audio drama. Sorry, it's really really good. Sorry, I apologize. No, it's read by somebody. And it's very entertaining. Matter's very funny. I think it's if you haven't read Matter by Ian Banks, it's almost in a funny way the culture does Monty Python and the Holy Grail. In some ways, it's a strange little. It's a very funny story, I think, and it's one of those last three culture books that he wrote. That it starts off and it's to do with shell worlds and things like this, and uh, yeah, it's one of those books where the action accelerates incredibly fast and just goes beyond the pacing in these books. They're really, really good. And I said that the scale of the culture is kind of pretty much beyond almost anything that's in science fiction, I think. Um, hmm, Possibly with the exception of books like maybe Olaf Stapleton's couple of books, First and Last Men, and is it Star Maker? Um, Goodness, it is. Was it Last and First Man? That's one of those things that I always get the wrong way around. But there we go. So I don't know if any of you read The Culture, guys, but we are going to be having a good look at them soon. And I think it's in some ways, if we think about a lot of this science fiction, I suppose this is one of the reasons why I was wanting to talk about the state of the art tonight. If you think about what we see on TV in terms of science fiction, what's arriving at the cinema, and it's been going on for a while, is that I suppose that the modern media tends to plunder stuff, and it's looking at properties that are coming out of, I suppose, that golden era of science fiction, the magazine era, the Campbellian era, whatever we want to call it. But it's been in particular a lot of stuff that's really from the 50s, some of it earlier. And I always sort of kind of question why does Hollywood look at this era? And it's like, I suppose arguably you could call the interest in Philip K. Dick films, the interest in Philip K. Dick properties as movies and TV series arguably begins with his death, if you see what I mean. And because I always thought he wasn't that well known. Excuse me, or not that big a name in science fiction. And they talk about the big four: Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Robert A. Heinlein, and Frank Herbert. And it's interesting that I actually think that probably that Philip K. Dick in some ways eclipses all of those authors. That Philip K. Dick, I suppose, as much as I made an argument for Dune being a bridge between the golden age of science fiction and the new wave, but that it's not really a part of either, but it has many of the trappings of both, if you see what I mean. The work of Philip K. Dick to me is just it's an island in science fiction, and it's got a massive volcano on it that's bigger than everything else. It just really does. All of his work stands apart, and as an author, within science fiction, he's got to be considered on a much higher kind of level, I think, than he generally is. I don't know, but I think he's generally pretty well acclaimed these days. But he's also very, very prolific, So I'm gabbing away, folks. I'm just chatting a wee bit about some of the science fiction that I'm looking at in general at the minute. So if you've got any wee questions or comments, fire away. I have been watching The Expanse, Joseph, by the way, but I think some people have maybe not caught up with it, or so we were talking a wee bit about it the last time, but we don't want to give away any spoilers. But I haven't read the books, as I was saying. But in terms of what I've seen on the screen, excuse me, certainly Bester's book, there's an awful lot there, I think. And not to say that they plagiarized the heck out of it. Wouldn't say that. It's just that there's ideas in there, and there's a structure and almost a framework for the solar system and so on. And the idea of the proto molecule that's in the Expanse. I suppose it's the proto molecule is arguably the Expanse's MacGuffin, isn't it? Really, it's very similar to the thing that we call pyre in Tiger. So there we go. So I don't know if you've got any questions, folks, or whatever, or wee comments. Fire away. And as I said, I'm not too sure if these authors are completely off your radar. I suppose one of the things for Alfred Bester, there's a character named after him in uh, TV series Babylon 5. It'll be played by Walter Koenig, if I remember correctly. And he's meant to be I think he's the main psychop character in that, and that all of that is a nod both to Bester and to the cops and the Demolished Man, I suppose. But yeah, let me see. In terms of, I heard actually the other day. Oh, sorry, just heard there today on the news that Meatloaf has passed away, which is quite sad to hear. And I was just thinking, always scanning through to see if there's any kind of science fiction news. I suppose Meatloaf has his science fiction chops, doesn't he? And Rocky Horror Picture Show. So it was just And I tend to, whenever I see a musician or a band, I tend to wonder, have I performed one of their songs live somewhere? And with Meatloaf, I had to go, yeah, I have. And it was Hot Patootie. It's one of those songs that I used to get mixed up with another song, but there we go. But very sad to hear him passing away. Excuse me. And in terms of, I suppose, where we were going with this is, if you think about the properties that are hitting the television, the cinema, we have Dune here. We've got Lord of the Rings coming back. We have Asimov's Foundation. Which is a set of books written arguably over about 40 years, I think, again. What else have we recently seen? I think we've just heard of another announcement, is it that we're getting a remake of Quantum Leap, pardon me, and we're getting a remake of Battlestar Galactica, I think, and we're getting a remake of what else? Babylon 5, I believe, yeah. And it just got me to thinking about A, sort of the reappropriation of other people's work from different mediums, and B, where's the fresh stuff, and how fresh is science fiction? David saying, I've never heard about Alfred Bester's book. We'll check it. Yeah, he's quite an important figure in science fiction, David, I would say. But I've seen lists of the top, what do you call, these top tens of science fiction before, and an awful lot of them seem to populate those two books. Dune, The Demolished Man, and Tiger often appear in that top 10. I'd argue that, I suppose, those lists also are a product of their times, I think, where you get a lot of self-promotion and mutual self-promotion by science fiction writers and their different little groups and communities and so on. And it's pretty much a done thing, and quite a lot of them know each other. But I'd argue, if you wanted to start listing, your top, I don't know, top tens are a strange thing, as I think, but if we can compare these books and say that, this is the best ever, really, let's have a look at this. Often these things, they're absolutes. They tend to fall down. Some of these books age better than others as well, I would say. In consideration of that alone, I thought Tiger hasn't aged at all. The Star's My Destination. So arguably, it's the book, when we're talking about science fiction, the two books that are considered the best two, if you like. That's them there together. And there's elements of one and the other, I would say. And then it comes down to, well, okay, this is 1956. This is, 1963, then 65 in book form. And yes, the transformation that Gullyfoyle goes through, the idea, you could argue that Gullyfoyle goes through several Gom Jabars, if you like, that they're crisis points that fundamentally change him. He's very much a Superman, a universal super being in some ways, evolving out of someone who's nothing. And that's I suppose, if we think about these different these different Van Vautian heroes, these superheroes, that science fiction, these universal super beings, demigods, quasi deities, almost whatever you want to call them. There's a whole stack of them around at this time, and yeah, I very much so. In terms of the response to the hero, David's just asking, "The Star's My Destination, is the book similar to some topics in June?" Yes, if you did a character study of Paul Atreides, a character study of Gully Foyle would go right next to him. Arguably, they go on the same kind of journey. The difference in Gully Foyle is he starts off as, I suppose the way he's presented in the book is that, well, Paul Atreides is at the top, isn't he? Really, he's the son of a duke, arguably groomed to rule a ducal house and possibly be emperor. So he's starting at the top of the pyramid. Gullyfoyle is at the absolute bottom of the societal pyramid. I mean, how he's described in the book, and just the way the book's quite interesting. But it starts off with that part of Blake's, poem, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry?" So the book's quite interesting. It starts off with a little history lesson about jaunting and how Charles Fort Jaunt and how it came to be. Jaunting would be the MacGuffin, if you like, of this book, and how people can travel certain distances and how it's limited and so on and so forth. And it basically talks about how this changes society from the inner planets, the outer planets, the outer satellites, etc. But how we get this Gully Foyle is description. I'll just read you his description here. And it has this very famous little poem from it. "Gully Foyle is my name, and Terra is my nation. Deep space is my dwelling place, and death's my destination." So he was Gulliver Foyle, mechanic's mate, third class, 30 years old, big boned and rough, and 170 days adrift in space. He was Gully Foyle, the oiler, wiper, bunkerman, too easy for trouble, too slow for fun, too empty for friendship, too lazy for love. The lethargic outlines of his character showed in the official Merchant Marine records. Excuse me. And then, of course, we get his record here and his number, and it says Foyle Gulliver AS-128/127-006. Education, none. Skills, none. Merits, none. Recommendations, none. And then personal comments. So this is the man's record. A man of physical strength and intellectual potential, stunted by lack of ambition. Energizes at minimum. The stereotype common man. Some unexpected shock might possibly awaken him, but psych cannot find the key. Not recommended for promotion. Has reached a dead end. So that's kind of his report card in the book, if you see what I mean. And he's a cipher. He's a null, and he's poked really badly. So yeah, arguably so it's a crisis point, and the idea of the book is, very quickly it starts up. The very famous line from the beginning of the book is, "He was 170 days dying and not yet dead." Excuse me. So the gist of it is, he's a man marooned on a spaceship that's been damaged, and there's a call for help, and another ship turns up and he thinks it's to rescue him, and the ship sees him and just leaves him there and tears off. And that's his crisis point, his Gotham Jabbar, whatever you want to call it. He absolutely, he comes to life in just basically a massive rage and fury. And it's about, this is the start of the book, and from that point on, it's about hunting down that ship, everyone on it, everyone who's got anything to do with it, and killing them all. And not just killing them all, killing them filthy. So it's a powerhouse of revenge in that sense. Not much to, I suppose, arguably most of June's about revenge, but this is a very angry person, full of emotion, and he sets out to do it. And initially, he's a very primitive man. It's brute strength, and it's how Gullyfoyle evolves is the real story, and mystery, I suppose, of the stars my destination slash Tiger. Um, so if yes, it's of the right era, David, but he's also a superior writer. He's a really really good writer. Um, Tiger Tiger. Let me see. Sorry, I keep calling it Tiger. As I said, the first publication title, I think, depending on which country you got, was Tiger. It's also known as The Stars of My Destination, I believe. So Alfred Bester is born in 1913 in New York. Just I give it. There's a wee bit of biography here of him in the book. His first science fiction story was The Broken Axiom and was published in Thrilling Wonder Stories in 1939. Excuse me. Bester continued to write and publish stories until 1942, and then he started writing for DC Comics and worked on some of their best known characters, such as Superman and Batman. Says after 4 years of this, he moved on to scripting radio shows for serials like Charlie Chan and The Shadow. In the 1950s, he started writing science fiction short stories again, and during the 50s, he produced two novels, The Demolished Man in 1953 and The Stars My Destination in 1956, while working as a feature writer for Holiday magazine, where he remained until the magazine stopped publishing in the 1970s. At this point, he returned to writing science fiction with two novels, Extro and Golem 100, which were published in 75 and 1980, respectively, and he passed away in 1987 after a long illness. In his will, he made out his house and literary estate to his bartender. It says here, there you go, that's a good one. So his bartender, I hope, is doing very, very well. But you can get these books in the Science Fiction Masterworks series, which is this series here, these ones. And you can often pick these up quite cheap, depending on where you get them. So you should find both. The one I've ordered is in this series here, to replace my rather old short paperback, which I've no idea what's happened to it. So absolutely, in terms of the Demolished Man, we have an inversion of this, I suppose, where we're going to have somebody at the very top, and arguably what you would call a Ben Reich. Well, I suppose the main character of the Demolished Man is Ben Reich. Excuse me. And if we would have to consider science fiction archetypes, I do consider Ben Reich to be the archetype of a certain type of, I suppose, what we used to call this Edisonian hero, the inventor hero who's now the mega rich head of a corporation. So the evil head of a corporation, of a technological corporation or scientific corporation, who acts as an individual against society. That's very much the Ben Reich, is the character of the Demolished Man, and I'm sort of looking really forward to having a look at that as well. So just to be public, just to say how much I'd enjoyed finishing this book, and really should be, if you're a fan of science fiction, if you've not heard of this guy, check him out. But arguably go with this book first, I think, and then if you like crime thrillers, by the way, The Demolished Man is really really good, but it is a perfect murder. So it's not so much about, yeah, it's a perfect murder when how do you commit a murder whenever the cops are psychic, basically whenever the cops can read your mind, and how do you get away with it? Basically, that's the Demolished Man. So just for that alone, it's such an unusual book, in terms of, I suppose, crime books even, but it's a hardcore wee science fiction book. There was a couple of other things I was going to tell you about, folks, just in terms of what we've got coming up, and just general chat. If you've any questions for me or comments or about any of these people, sorry, bear with me a second. Fire away, But it was just the real thing that I got out of reading Alfred Bester's Tiger again is how fresh it must have seemed. How fresh it must have seemed at the time. And it still seems pretty fresh. This guy's just full of ideas, but boy, does he take you on a really good roller coaster of a story. And I also thought it was really a good example of, we talk about sometimes where a lot of stories, We can see other stories in people's work. We talk about Dune being riddled, with other people's narratives, and that there's a framework of what happens in the Trojan War, and obviously the curse of the House of Atreus and the Pelopid line and so on, and various other myths, in particular the Oedipus myth as well. And we often see science fiction that's highly derivative, and it applies with fantasy as well. Pardon me. There's a bit of a difference, I think. For one, when fantasy is derivative, I suppose it is often just taking the framework of other people's stories, or often I find obscure stories that are outside of one culture's point of reference, if you see what I mean. So, Dune can borrow heavily from, arguably, say, Dune's published as an American book by an American author in America, if we want to think of it about it that way. And modern America being, I suppose, a reasonably new nation, ultimately, I suppose, as are most nations. But there's a shrouding within Dune of all of these different cultures that might not be within the general awareness of the average American reader, and especially if that market is perceived as being kind of the teenage boys at that time. It's easy to get stuff like that in. I think Tiger does the same thing with the Count of Monte Cristo, and again, I don't know how familiar we are with the Count of Monte Cristo these days. But when I was younger, Alexander Dumas was incredibly popular, um, and Jim McFarlane's just saying there, reading a few samples of Bester's writing reminds me of Fyodor Dostoevsky, with very eloquently written and vivid descriptions. Yeah, and I can't comment too much on Dostoevsky, but eloquently written, vivid descriptions. And as I said, there's one other thing. Off he goes. He'll play with words on the page, take your little, and how those words move and what they do and how they look on the page actually has relevance. It's not just I've decided to draw. I'm going to just take you on a wee journey and make you do this kind of thing. Um, and it's different in both books actually. And I suppose it's something that maybe wouldn't stand out too much in this day and age, if you see what I mean. But yeah, it's a cracking book, a really good read. And as I said, I've got my copy of the Demolished Man is arriving tomorrow, and I can't wait to read it. And it's next on my list. I wanted to deal with Alfred Bester in a nice little neat package. It's nice to chat to you about him a wee bit here. I haven't got my kind of full academic hat on and done my full background work on him yet, but he's someone that I enjoyed his work in a cluster. If you see, I mean, I got his short stories, Tiger, Demolished Man, picked up Extra around the same time, I think, and I think I have something else by him around the house as well. But I read them all in a little run, and I was wow, who is this? Why haven't I seen this guy before? And again, I would talk to you guys about being from Northern Ireland and certain fiction not being available really. So he was completely off my radar for a long time, and then just discovered him and went, wow, this guy is fantastic. Um, Absolute, and it's particular. He has I suppose different writing periods, but it's this little period in the early 50s to the 56, 57 there. He's just wow, and very impressive, and he outputs nowhere near the same as something like Philip K. Dick, for example, but he's in the same class of writer. His imagination, he's not just an ideas machine, but he is an ideas machine. But and you'll find these ideas around. I suppose this is the point I was making. you know, Alexander Dumas' books. I think he's one of the biggest selling authors on the earth at a certain point. I think I'm pretty certain that once upon a time, the Three Musketeers was the biggest selling book on planet Earth. Up is the Three Musketeers, the Man in the Iron Mask. The Four Musketeers. 20 years on, is it 20 years later? Um, there we A Man in the Iron Mask and the Count of Monte Cristo. All they're massive stories. I personally love there's a bunch of films that came out, and I said I think they're all, what they have in common is that they're all directed or produced by Alexander Salkind, I think is the name, and it's the ones with Charlton Heston and Raquel Welch, with Michael York as D'Artagnan, excuse me, and Oliver Reed and Frank Finlay and Richard Chamberlain. They're the Four Musketeers, and I think you have Roy Kinnear as as the, oh goodness, the yeah, what a cast those films had. And so you'd got the Three Musketeers, the Four Musketeers, and I think they did eventually do 20 years later, and I think it might have been Roy Kinnear's last film. Christopher Lee as your, and Charlton Heston as your villains. These films were great. I think they also did The Prince and the Pauper, um, by Mark Twain, and they did a whole, and they did the Count of Monte Cristo with Richard Chamberlain, and I'm pretty sure he was the man in the Iron Mask as well. All of these films, and I think they must be from the 70s. I'm pretty certain. They're absolutely brilliant. I highly recommend them to anybody. So, but the point I was just trying to make is that it becomes a wee bit, yeah, it is a bit Count of Monte Cristo, this. Excuse me. But the way he's used that original story to frame this, it doesn't impede the story, or it's not an obvious borrowing in that sense, if you see what I mean. And it doesn't detract in any way from the originality of the story. The thing about fantasy is whenever it does that, so science fiction can explore and take ideas, and you get books with a similarity and commonality of themes and ideas, but there's many different ways to explore those from that point of view. But when fantasy tends to do it, it's often just I'm just going to borrow, this is a good story, I'm going to borrow it and shape it a wee bit and frame it my own way, And I suppose it's why so many fantasy stories read like they're Lord of the Rings. A lot of them read like Lord of the Rings, the essential steps of the plot. And I was quite astounded by the Wheel of Time, which I'd never got round to reading, simply because of the size of it. Always seen it in bookshops. I was absolutely stunned at how much of it is just a rip-off of Lord of the Rings, and a chunk of Dune, I think, as well. There's Ryan the Scholar saying, "Hey all, hello Ryan, and thanks for joining us, Ryan. We're just having a good old science fiction natter tonight, but we've been talking about, really, myself finishing Tiger, The Star's My Destination, this book here by Alfred Bester. Just in general, how we've had a good, really enjoyed it, and we're just seeing how big it's a massive influence, I think, on a lot of science fiction. And I'd argue that Dune does the same thing, by the way. There's an awful lot of science fiction, just that, oh, there's Dune, let's try and be like that, And yeah, Bester's a very intriguing writer. He's got something to do with, I think he's well invested in the comic book world, I believe. My understanding is he's got something, and I don't know too much about American comics, but I think he's got something to do with the Green Lantern. I don't know, but I think he's reasonably famous in the comic book world for something to do with that, I suppose, But yeah, I'd argue he's a very, very important figure in science fiction in the 20th century. And if yeah, wouldn't it be great to write a book like these two in particular? I have to say, I mean, I've read Extra, and I didn't find it in the same mode, if you know what I mean. I felt that the author had changed a bit, and that particularly the pacing in the book, and yeah, and I'm also kind of wondering how some of this stuff will stand up in whenever you present it to a modern reader. Excuse me. There's the occasional bit of language in it that's a bit dated. And interestingly enough, by the way, we did a wee how women are treated in this book is very, very interesting, because of what jaunting brings to society. We did recently put up Sultana's Dream, which is an early science fiction story, which is by a Muslim woman from Bangladesh, I believe. And the story itself features heavily the idea of purdah, which is this practice of keeping your women locked away. I really like the title. It's Sic iter ad astra in Latin. Ah, thank you. Yeah, there is something to do with the quotation, and the little poem within it. I think it's quite interesting that we get two versions of the poem. And we read the first one there a wee minute ago, which is it's starts off with "Death's my destination," but the wee poem returns towards the end of the book. Gullyfoyle is my name, and Terra is my nation. Deep space is my dwelling place. The star is my destination. So yeah, it's I'll tell you what, it's a book I think if you like Dune, folks, or if you're I'd say if you like cyberpunk, you'd like this. If you like a good swashbuckling kind of adventure story, you would enjoy it. If you like a kind of space opera type thing, you would enjoy it. If you like something a bit transcendental and esoteric, you'd enjoy it. And if certainly for if you like things like Dune, stuff like Philip K. Dick, all sorts of this kind of stuff, it's a cracker of a book. Really good, really really good. And I'm still kind of just yeah, my problem is kind of tonight. I don't want to talk too much about it, and because otherwise, what's the point in doing a video on them? But we want to keep some stuff back for the video and research them properly, just to make sure that we get that eye for detail that we have across them. But and then, as I said, once we do this video, we're going to write this one up this week, and hopefully, then we're going to tear through the Demolished Man and follow that video up, and then that'll be our B for Bester, I suppose. And then we're going to head towards the letter C, which is the culture. But there was another wee thing, I suppose, in terms of a couple of things that I'm looking forward to this week, and we're looking to try and see how we can bring content of quality a bit easier in terms of to the station. Doing stuff on books requires, from my point of view, I want to read the book. I wouldn't put out a video on a book unless I'd recently read it, which is quite time consuming in that sense, especially with doing other things and doing the book club. But I'd thought about, well, we're also here about to do a bit of work on science fiction films and science fiction comic books. So it occurred to me we can get through that kind of material a little bit quicker. So I'm hope what I've got coming up, just having a chat with my wife about films that she's seen or hasn't seen, and we're always having a wee chat about the British New Wave. Excuse me, taking their nod from the French New Wave of cinema. And I thought I was having a look through my video collection, DVD collection, sorry, showing my age there, and wondering about what sort of films we can bring to the station to talk about that again might be not too obvious to new readers or new viewers, I suppose, a new generation, but maybe have gone by people's radar from my own generation. And I was thinking about the French New Wave and going in our A to Z. The first thing I hit was Alphaville by Jean-Luc Godard. And I was thinking, that's an interesting one to have a wee look at. And the other one I'm going to have, so I thought about trying to maybe pair up a couple of films to look with. And then I was thinking, of course, the wonderful Fahrenheit 451 by Francois Truffaut. And how better, what a better way to do a episode actually than we've got the French New Wave producing really, really good science fiction. So I don't know if you're aware of either of these films. And I wouldn't. I would tend to pop Barbarella in with those two, but it's not really French New Wave. Because I really like Barbarella, but just thinking Alphaville and Fahrenheit 451, just to have a look at a couple of the more sort of quirky, unusual science fiction films that are out there. And I thought, yeah, that's a good way to. It's all about science fiction from around the world as well. And of course, we have Ray Bradbury's novel, but we've got Francois Truffaut doing his thing with it. And I think there was a recent attempt to do Fahrenheit 451, and I watched the trailer for it, and the trailer put me off it because you had to read in the trailer. And I don't know if anybody's seen these two films, but in particular, this is the stars of this are Oscar Werner and Julie Christie. Oh, I could tell you something, by the way. What's her name? Bear with me a wee second. There's a very famous woman from Northern Ireland in this film. Oh, let me see. And I happen to know this because was related to a friend of mine. Let's see I can't remember her name for the life of me, but I'll just go and check it. It's got some good acting chops, actually. Do. I hope it. B. Duffel. That's her name, if I recall correctly. Yes. And right, her name's B. Duffel. I'll type it in for you. I spelled it correctly. 2 L's. There we go. That's her name there. There's a very famous scene in Fahrenheit 451 on this wee, with all the books. This wee woman setting all the books and setting herself on fire. That's B. Duffel, who's from Northern Ireland, by the way, folks. And you'll also know her if. Yeah, a friend of mine, Tom's. I think she would have been his aunt or something like that. I think she's passed away a good while ago, I imagine. I don't actually see much on her there. But if you know your Monty Python and the Holy Grail, she's the little woman that they bring the knights who say nee, bring a shrubbery to. Just not do your worst. So she's got in terms of acting chops, she's in Fahrenheit 451 and she's in Monty Python's The Holy Grail. There you go. David's saying, one question: which other novels of Frank Herbert you recommend to read besides Dune? Oh, well, there's only one that I would really recommend, because I have to say I don't really enjoy too many of them, and I haven't read them all. But I've skim read a few of them. I haven't read the Pandora sequences. Excuse me. The one I'll always go with, David, is The Dragon in the Sea, which is also called Under Pressure and also called 21st Century Sub, which was published in 1956, the same year as Tiger. But I'll tell you what, as much as we think Frank's a fantastic writer, I'll tell you what, his first three novels are. So the first three novels are The Dragon in the Sea, and I think his preferred title for it was Under Pressure. Then Dune, and then The Green Brain, which I find very hard to say properly in a Northern Irish accent, but not that I have such a thing, I suppose. But there it is. I actually love these wee old tiny pulps, if you know what I mean, as I would call them. But there you go. The cover and everything. This is not good. God help me! Look, I've even annotated it. Like, I've been through it. I have actually worked these books. Yeah. I don't know. This one's copyright 1966 by Frank Herbert. Part of it appeared in Amazing Stories as a novelette entitled Green Slaves, which was copyright 1965. I'll read you the first paragraph of it. Here you go. He looked pretty much like the bastard offspring of a Guarani Indio and some backwood farmer's daughter, some Sertanista who'd tried to forget her enslavement to the Encomendero system by eating the iron, which is what they call love-making, through the grill of a console gate. This is a badly written book. I did not enjoy it at all. And I would not recommend it to anybody. It's not particularly long. It's a very small wee book, 160 pages. I dare say if you had it in modern print. And I suppose I was reading this stuff to get a better sense of Frank Herbert. I found it, very pulpy, if you know what I mean. Not a good book at all. Now, Hellstrom's Hives of Interest, I think. Let me see. And I even think, did somebody attempt to make some kind of film out of that, possibly? The one that I would go with, guys, I suppose the other